how does a guy go from being on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, playing in a hair band, to playing smooth jazz in Nashville? Well, let me tell you, but it starts at the beginning. It starts at, learning music and studying guitar. And way back before I went out to Los Angeles, I'd started playing in the jazz band in high school. And I'd gone to Berkeley College of Music for a summer. And I studied, my scales, and I learned my chord voicings, and I got to play in jazz labs where you would, get to play over some of these songs and get some experience. So, when I went out to Los Angeles, I could already play, and I still went to GIT, and I still studied for a year, and I worked on my jazz playing because it became pretty obvious to me that there were always going to be players, rock players, that could play faster or with more intensity. There was always going to be somebody that you just weren't going to be able to compete with. And I had that revelation one night at Doug Weston's Troubadour, one of the clubs on Santa Monica Boulevard, but it was considered part of that Sunset Strip scene because so many legendary bands had put on shows there, like Wasp and Guns N' Roses. And, before that, Elton John had got his big break playing at the Troubadour. But I remember, everybody said, oh, you got to see Racer X. You got to go see Racer X. And I remember, I think I went by myself that night. I went down to the Troubadour, and I stood in line, and I bought a ticket, and I was blown away by how many people were there. And I get inside the club, and I think it was still light out when I got there. And get inside the club, and I'm waiting. I don't remember any opening acts or anything. I might have hung in the little side bar area before the band started. But I'd started hearing rumors, hearing people talking about Billy Sheehan and Steve Vai and David Lee Roth were all up in the wings watching this performance, because Racer X was the hot, shreddy guitar thing at the time with their guitar player, Paul Gilbert. And it had Juan Alderete, I believe is his last name, if I'm saying it right, who eventually would end up in Mars Volta and last played with Marilyn Manson. And I guess he had a bike injury and he's not playing anymore. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you know this guy. Now, Bruce Bouillet had been in Racer X at the time, but something had happened and he was unable to make this show. So I catch this Racer X show, and I see Paul Gilbert, and I had seen Yngwie before that, and I'd seen Eddie Van Halen, live. And so I thought I had a pretty good idea of what I was going to see. But then I see Paul Gilbert pull out that drill. They had picks attached to it, and he hits that drill, and it wasn't just for making sounds like on Van Halen's Pound Cake. No, he was actually using the drill and syncing it up with his left hand and playing these incredibly crazy fast runs. And at that point, I said, man, that's it. I am not going to focus my time at GIT on playing rock guitar. I've got to learn how to play jazz. And, in my head, I thought, I could be the next Scott Henderson or Frank Gambale or something like that. But man, that is a very hard thing to achieve. But I did achieve getting to play the graduation ceremony with a fusion piece that I had written. And I did learn how to play over changes. And I got better as a musician. So I had the ability to read chord charts. with, all kinds of different chords, altered chords. And, I could pick out voicings. And if it said, G7, flat 5, I knew where the 5 was. And I knew how to do all these things. So, I get out in LA and I'm trying to look for work, and I wasn't even really trying to get into a Sunset Strip band. And it was that, breakup with a girlfriend, a really traumatic breakup with a girlfriend, that led me to Music Connection and picking a Sunset Strip band. I don't even think I was necessarily looking to join a band like that. I had seen plenty of Sunset Strip bands and plenty that were not very good. But, the path we choose sometimes is kind of chosen for us. And I called this ad and I ended up playing the Sunset Strip. And, the difference was that I had always played different types of music, and I understood, sometimes you got to play country in life. Sometimes you got to play rock. Sometimes you got to play blues. Sometimes you got to play R&B. It's just, a part of life. Music changes. And if you lock into playing one style of music, you're going to be stuck the rest of your life. When that music ends, I know guys from those Sunset Strip days, and now they're playing, at VFW halls and stuff like that. And they're cranking out, everything from, Poison to Alice in Chains. But man, they really weren't able to play in a lot of different situations and gig a lot because they weren't versatile. And so, being able to realize that, hey, music is a haircut, it's an outfit, it's a costume, and you can change your haircut, you can change your costume, and you can change your guitar, everything, and adapt and play in different situations. Perhaps the most important lesson for a young guy that I'm going to tell on this channel is be able to switch it up. Always be able to change and do something different. So the Sunset Strip thing blows up, the band breaks up, everything's over. I realize, man, if I stay out here in Los Angeles, I might have fun, but I'm going to be stuck working a day gig and nothing is going to change. Seattle is blowing up. If you're in LA and you've got long hair, they just say you're just in a hair band, and you're just negated, And I didn't see a real clear path of anything changing from me having to work, a day job and all that. I didn't see anything changing for me. I was not connected in LA to different styles of music. I was not connected to the wedding scene or any of that. And so when I knew I was going to move to Nashville, I called up Reggie Wooten, who was my good friend from the past and guy I used to jam with. And we saw Yngwie Malmsteen together and Eddie Van Halen together. But Reggie is a very versatile, probably one of the most versatile guitar players I ever knew. Man, for a guy that's, you would look at him, and because he's, African American or black or whatever you want to call it, you wouldn't think that guy could play country guitar, but man, he can let it fly, dude. He can chicken pick. Back in those days, dude, I remember the first time I heard him, I was walking by the country show and I heard this chicken picking guitar just snapping and popping like crazy. And I said, what in the heck? And I went from backstage and I poked my head around the corner to see the show. And I see Reggie, an all-black country band at Busch Gardens, playing country music and playing the heck out of it. Every single one of those guys could just play the heck out of country music, man. They figured it out. And Victor Wooten would pull out the fiddle and play. I mean, he taught himself how to play fiddle. These guys were just absolutely incredible. And Reggie Wooten chicken picking better than I'll ever be able to do in my life. That's one of those things, man, that, when I would be playing in these wedding bands and stuff in Nashville, And at the end of the night, someone would say, play Rocky Top. And it would be like a whole night of playing funk, rhythm guitar, and rock guitar solos. And now play country. It was always the toughest thing to do. And switch it up like that. And some nights I would do better than others. But I would always get through it, just going. Later in life, I'd be like, pass the solo to the keyboard player. Keyboards. Because, man, it's like such a gear change. And, man, I've spent time, working on my country playing. But even when I was out on the road with country acts, you wouldn't get extended periods of solos. You'd usually end up having to play solos off the record. Or, later, when I was touring with my last country act, it was really more of a rock gig. I wasn't the chicken picking player on the gig, and so I just did my rock thing. But, being versatile and being able to play different styles and playing R&B and playing all these playing pop songs. Like when I was at Busch Gardens, we would play El DeBarge, to the Rhythm of the Night, just these goofy like pop songs. And so I had experience playing all kinds of different music. And so when I got to Nashville and Reggie says, hey man, I got a gig for you. It's this Friday and we're going to play this little Mayor Bowls, which was on 2nd Avenue. It was kind of like the jazz club in Nashville. And at that time, Nashville wasn't really like a jazz town. I'd say now there's some really great jazz players in Nashville, but back in those days, it was more of like a smooth jazz type thing. So you didn't play a lot of outside playing, and there wasn't any like bebop or like really fast jazz, but it was that LA kind of smooth jazz. And I had listened to that quite a bit when I first got out to LA, and I turned on the dial and I found a station called The Wave, and I put that on and I hear these slap bass parts and these funky little guitar parts. Like, this is kind of cool, but then I would listen for a long time and go, wait a minute, everything's diatonic. There's no outside playing mixed in. So it was all kind of just for cruising around in your Mercedes or your BMW, cruising down Pacific Coast Highway. It's kind of that alternate sound of LA. I know there was the Sunset Strip scene, but the smooth jazz was kind of the music of the, before yacht rock kind of became a thing, it was kind of the smooth jazz was a big thing out there. I had certainly listened to it a lot and understood what the guitar was doing in those kinds of songs and those kinds of grooves. So I find myself in Nashville just after playing the Sunset Strip and going, oh man, I got to play this little jazz club. And I had gone the week before and there was a guitar player, playing that night. Reggie Wooten was playing bass, just like the night that I was going to play. Reggie said, I'll play bass, you play guitar. And this guy was there, and he was, I think he had been in the military or in a military band, but he was a guitar player, and he seemed like he was going through something that night. He was not happy, and he was upset. And I was like, hey man, you sound great, and shook his hand and everything. He just gave off the vibe that he didn't want to be there and that he was done with Nashville. I never saw him again after that. I don't know. I mean, Nashville was not the boom town that it later became. So, you'd play these little gigs for $75, and that was pretty much it, man. There wasn't a ton of like places, that were, jumping like it is now. So, he may have been, I don't know, disenchanted with the whole Nashville scene at the time. And like I said, he played that week. I saw what those guys did, and I thought, okay, now I know what I need to do. And I thought, man, I got this long hair. I hadn't cut my hair. And I was like, what am I going to do? Okay, well, I've got a button-down shirt in my closet, and I'll put on some black jeans and a button-down shirt, and I'll tie my hair back. Now, when I had worked out in LA, worked in the hotel, I had had to pull by, man, they almost didn't want to hire me because of my hair. But I said, look, I can tie my hair back. And I tied it back into two knots. And I folded it up in itself because my hair was like down halfway down my back. And I would slick it back with gel. So it was like Steven Seagal, and I tie up the thing because they said, we don't want your hair hanging over the shirt. So I pulled it all back and had it slicked back, and I had this, Bellman's shirt on. And so I knew how to clean up my act, and I knew how to not look like I was like a heavy metal guitar player. So I did all that. I went down to the gig. I had a ponytail and my hair slicked back. And I played this gig with, Michael Fair and his wife at the time. And Reggie Wooten was on bass, and Ralph Pace was on drums, and Joe Wooten was on keyboards. And man, I just played these, they put the charts, they had a book of charts in front of me. And I would just play rhythm guitar and pick little chicken picking parts out, and, and take solos, get to take solos over some of these songs. And Michael Fair played flugelhorn, and he would play the melodies of these songs. So it was an easy and fun gig. And that was my first gig in Nashville. But the basis for it, the building block of it, is that I wasn't just a rock guitar player. I wasn't a metalhead that couldn't adjust and change. I was a guy that had played a lot of different styles even before I got to LA. I played jazz, and I played in a country show at Busch Gardens, and I played in a pop show. So I understood about getting clean tones, getting R&B style tones, playing little R&B style single note parts. I understood all those things, and I understood that ultimately it's just music. And if you keep your mind open and you're able to play different styles, you're going to have a much longer career.